Hi, welcome to Angel's Nook. If you like our videos, please like, comment, and especially subscribe so you know when the next one comes out. And if you're commenting, please let us know what you like, what you're interested in, what's helping you, and what you might like to see in the future. Thanks for stopping by.
Hello, I'm Princess Cashmere. Please do not fast forward through this introduction, as I have commissioned Angel's Nook to enlighten and guide you as to my very specific preferences when you apply me to surfaces. You may begin, Angelique.
We all have that one person in our family, at our workplace, at school, that when they walk into the room, they want the spotlight shining on them. Well, Princess Cashmere is that color in the Heirloom Traditions paint colors. If you master the techniques for her, every other color will be a breeze. And many people feel like that her little sister Bone is almost as needy as she is. I'm using a cheat sheet to try to get through this as quickly as possible for you because there's a lot of information you need. I realize this is going to be an extra long video, but the chapters will help you quickly move to the section that you need to find the information about cashmere for the specific thing that you are working on. Except for dry time, all of the tips in this video apply to every color to help you be successful to get the gorgeous finish that these paints can give. These are key points that I have learned over 7 years of using the products and doing a lot of projects with cashmere. Cashmere was my introduction to this paint with my upper cabinets, and it was a steep learning curve that I'd like to help you avoid some of the pitfalls that I went through getting there. Whenever you are working with cashmere, it has got to be thoroughly stirred before you start using it. Using a traditional paint stirrer and stir the paint up from the bottom, not for 30-40 seconds, at least 3 minutes. Stir it really well, and then periodically as you're using it, every 3-4 doors, give it a good stir. Whites, the way their pigments are implemented into paint products, they need that. And if it's sat overnight, stir it before you start working with it again the next day to start painting with it. Cashmere always needs extra dry time to fully level out so that in successive coats you don't develop an orange peel texture. I absolutely despise orange peel. So when I tell you and I'm pointing to a surface and say there is no orange peel, there isn't. Because I would be sanding the daylights out of it to get rid of it if there was, because it's just not attractive. 12 hours for the first coat is optimum. 8 to 12 hours with the remaining coats is really beneficial. You don't want to shorten it to less than that. Bone can use at least 4 to 5, and the other whites, 2 or 3 hours is helpful for them as well if you want to get that smooth finish. Anytime you find an area of texture, so when your doors have dried or whatever you're working on has dried, check it for texture. If you see texture, that has got to be sanded smooth, or every single coat of paint after that is going to increase and amplify the texture and make it even more visible. And the sanding is not a light hand sanding. It is sanding until when you pick that up and you're looking at it, you see no texture at all. Make sure that you get all of that off with a damp paper towel. Vacuuming will not remove it all. And then start painting again. Don't wrap your brush overnight. You really are not saving paint. You're starting then with a cold brush, cold paint. Cold paint does not apply well. And little bits, this paint dries so fast that on the outside of that brush, you're going to get little bits in areas where it dries, the paint is dried. That does 2 things. It makes your brush stiff, and it also will flick off into your surface without you realizing it. And then you see these areas where what? It looks like the roller came off on my surface. It's usually, when I look at the photos, it's actually flecks of paint that came off of the brush because the brush was not cleaned and dry paint came off on it. It's possible for sponge to come off the roller if it's too old and it's been used too long, but it's not likely. When you are painting with cashmere, wash your brush out between every coat of paint. When you'll see how I use and dip into the paint on this video, you'll see I'm not going high up on the brush. And so there's not a lot of paint building up into it. So if you dip the brush correctly, you're not wasting or losing paint by washing it out. The rollers come in a 2-pack for a reason. Cashmere especially is prone to getting up into the rollers. And so every 2 to 3 doors, 4 max, toss one of those rollers into a bowl of water and keep painting with the second roller. When you get to the point that the second roller needs to be washed, wrap your brush in saran wrap so that it doesn't dry on the outside and you don't risk those flecks of paint. Wash your rollers out completely. Hot water, running hot water usually does it really well. Squeeze out the excess moisture and then squeeze it between layers of paper towel until all you feel on that roller is a slight dampness. Don't leave it wet because it will cause water to run into your surface, and that's a disaster with the paint, but especially with Miss Cashmere. The video has not been sped up in any sections except where there was some sanding done to show you the difference between sanding a surface and not sanding a surface when applying cashmere. So normally the average size cabinet door shouldn't take you more than 5 minutes. And I've purposely let you see in real time applying these coats of paint so that you can see how long it's taking me to apply, how much paint I'm applying, and how much time I spend rolling on the different pieces. It's always work on the back of your doors first to get through the steep learning curve. It's really important to figure it out because the back of your doors, you're going to see them, but they're going to open and close so quickly that most people are never going to notice if there's texture or if there's a thin spot on it somewhere. But the front of your doors in a bright white are going to show exactly what the finish looks like. This video is designed to be your one-stop reference guide for cashmere and a wide range of applications. So you will see on this video cashmere applied over honey oak with its original finish, over a honey oak that the finish has been sanded off and down to raw wood, over laminate, and over raw wood that has knots that need to be dealt with to be filled and sealed before any painting is done. And you will notice that in none of these steps do I ever use primer. And I have never used primer with cashmere. It's not needed. The primer that is in this paint is sufficient to cover surfaces and hide whatever color was underneath. You'll also see magnified images from the front of my cabinet doors in my kitchen compared with that were done with brush and roll compared to spray finish on a factory door that is white, to see how closely, when correctly done, brush and roll rivals spray without the hassles that go into setup for spray and the extra paint that you use. Showing the application of all the coats of paint is purposeful, and I talk about specific things as I'm doing it to help call your attention to it. Princess Cashmere will also be adding her input at different times. Most people understand what they are seeing when someone shows them how to do something. But our brains have not embedded the information and we have not truly learned it until we can replicate the process, and even better, we can teach someone else how to do it. So showing you all the coats in real time is to help you understand and imprint in your mind exactly what is going on with the process, and calling attention to specific things to remind you to look for those things in how you are doing it on your own piece or your own cabinets. When you are rolling, the first rolls are always just firm enough to blend the strokes, but they are not hard like rolling a roller on a wall to apply wall paint. The remaining rolls, just let that roller touch the surface on its own barely, just to pop bubbles. You might want to think of the roller more as a bubble popper than a roller, to imprint to yourself that you're not wanting to have a lot of pressure on that roller. And a lot of pressure will also pull a lot of paint into your roller. If you see that your roller is getting saturated with paint, you're pressing too hard or you have too much paint on the surface. You will see what looks like a little bit more pressure when I go into the decorative part of the frame of a cabinet door. That is to allow the roller to actually do its job of both blending and popping bubbles at the same time. But you won't see that kind of pressure anyplace else on the surface, even when I am blending the paint. If you have tons and tons of bubbles, you're either pressing too hard or you have too much paint. And if you're not getting hardly any bubbles at all, or you're seeing spots where there's very light coverage, there's heavy coverage, you're not applying the paint correctly. So watch carefully how I do that. Because I want these videos to be honest and upfront, you're going to see the first time in 7 years that I have needed 4 coats rather than 3 coats of cashmere on anything. If applied properly, and the way this video is going to show you, 99% of the time over any surface, any color, all you are going to need is 3 coats of cashmere. But the key thing is your coat of paint has got to be even on each of those coats. Don't start trying to apply it thinner. Don't, if you've got thick and thin spots, don't try to put a huge thick coat on, because then you're going to create texture. You have to start from the beginning putting even coats on. You're going to hear in each of the sections, because there's the cabinet door, there's laminate, there's raw wood, there's then the showing you what spray versus brush and roll looks like. You're going to hear information repeated, because I know people are not going to sit and watch this entire video. But if you go to each section, that section that you need, I want to make sure you have information that's going to help you be successful with that. And I strongly urge you, whatever section you're going to help you with what you're working on, watch it in its entirety, because you're going to pick up tips, you're going to see things that will help you understand better the process. And if you would please, to help us out with the amount of time and effort in making these videos and editing them for your viewing to help you be successful, if you would please press that subscribe button. It takes just a couple of seconds of your time and will eventually give us some benefits for the hard work we're putting into for these.
Takoda here. For a quick search, click on the video, pull your finger along the bar, and watch those chapter titles pop up to guide you.
Over time, the honey oak of cabinets, the grain begins to show more, especially if it's been regularly cleaned, because some of the finish gets worn off and water gets under there and raises the grain. In addition, most of these cabinets were done with very cheap finishes, which would not have sealed this really well to start with. So I'm going to paint this in cashmere, but I'm going to try and experiment with it to let you see what would happen if you sanded this first and then applied paint, especially for those of you who really hate the grain of this and don't want it to show through. Let's see what would happen if I do half of this sanded really well with an orbital sander and leave the other in its original finish and then paint it with cashmere, and we'll look at magnified close-ups of it and see what it looks like. This is magnified almost 6 times to let you see how craggy this surface is, how very grooved it is. Oak is what is called an open grain, which means this is how it is supposed to be, but it doesn't have to be this severely rough if it was properly prepped when it was originally done. So we're going to look at this after I have sanded it, and then we're going to look at it with one half of it done with cashmere without it sanded, and one half with it sanded and cashmere, to see what the difference is in the level of grain that you see. I'm going to use an orbital sander that is triangular in shape because it's going to give me more control. There are also sponge sanders out there that you can get to get into these grooves like this, but I'm hoping I can handle it with this. I'm not using a full round one because it does not give me enough control to get into the tight spots like these corners. And I don't want to completely rip this tape off if I can keep from it, to try to keep some line of demarcation on here. You don't want to go across grain when you're sanding because you really make scratch marks that you just can't get out. So that's why if you're hand sanding, you've got to follow this grain. With this particular sander and tool, I can move in different directions because of how the sandpaper moves with the motor with this. I'm starting with 60 grit to knock through the polyurethane that's still there, and then I'll work my way up into finer and finer grains of sandpaper. This is a rough grade of sandpaper, grit rather. That has knocked the finish down. It's knocked some of the grain down, but right now it would be a really, really rough surface if you were putting finish on it. When you're working with areas like this, the tip of this is really helpful, because if you just try to go in here and sand like this or up and down on it, you're going to take every bit of that design out. And even on these edges here, you can't tilt the sander. You've got to keep it in the plane of the piece of the wood. So you've got to keep it held straight. Sometimes that means having somebody else to help hold it for you, or figuring out how to make a jig to hold it in place for you. And the same thing with this angle down here. You want to not be just coming straight at it. You want to stay on the plane of the cut. So the next one that I will use is 120, and then I'll work my way up to 220. The sanders really like to jump off of tiny edges, so I would highly suggest you try practicing sanding on the back of the door. And when you see me grabbing it with both my hands, it's because it's helping to brace it, because there's a lot of pressure that you have to hold against this to keep it in place, or with its vibration, it's going to knock it out of where you expect it to be. So you just kind of got to learn that pressure and learn how to handle one of these things. They're easy once you do, but it needs some practice. If you do not have a power sander, or you're not comfortable using one, you can use blocks of wood, you can use pieces of pipe, and carpenter's tape, which is the tape that's under here, to stick it onto these. And then you can hand sand. On a small piece of furniture, hand sanding is doable. It's very tiring, but it's doable. On a whole kitchen, I would not want to undertake hand sanding everything because it's just too labor intensive, and it's unbelievable how long hand sanding will take you to get down to what this quick sanding is doing with the machine. But this is also good if you have just a tight place on a piece of furniture that you don't need to get, you can't even get in there with that, but you can get in with small sanding blocks. And they work much better than the sponges. The sponges do not allow you to get enough pressure behind the grit of the sandpaper and are basically only good for a really light sanding job. So the next grit I'm going to use is 180. Nice and dusty. I'm going to stop at 220 grit. There's a nice smooth finish on this right now, and this is going to be painted. If this were a really expensive piece of wood furniture, I would go to the trouble of going through and going as far as 320, 400, even 800 grit sandpaper to get the absolute smoothest finish I can. But I know that oak is never going to give me that because it is an open grain wood. And there's no point in going to that much sanding through that many levels when you're going to paint something. Starting with the rough, the 60, and working your way up progressively to the 220 is going to give you the smoothest surface. You cannot jump from just 60 to 220. You will not get the smoothness. You've got to work your way through the grades of sandpaper, which is another reason why whenever you can, using this paint, just deglossing and painting is such an easier solution. But this is going to see how much different the oak looks if you sand it all the way or you just degloss and paint. I'm going to degloss this with the wipes that have deglosser on them because this is down to raw wood. That's the only way to get all the grooves of that old finish off of this to see if it will smooth out with paint. So with this raw wood, you absolutely do not want to use a brush to apply the liquid deglosser and then the green scrubby. It's going to raise the grain horrifically on raw wood. So you either want to use the wipes, or if you don't have the wipes yet, you can take a good sturdy paper towel, not a cheap one, a good name brand one, and get it wet but not drippy with the liquid deglosser. Squeeze it out really well, and it'll do the same thing for you as this. These have a roughness to them, which is really nice for, it's not smooth like a regular wet wipe that you may be used to using. And be sure to either use your finger or a butter knife and really get into the grooves where you've got a design like this, because those are the places that grease and dust and dirt get into, and the paint, unless that's all cleaned out, the paint will not adhere well with it. I'm really scrubbing onto this with the side that's finished, but the side that I have sanded does not need that. It needs just a quick wipe, just basically to get rid of any sanding residue that's left on it. There's really nothing to scrub off of it. If you have bought raw wood cabinets to install in your kitchen, those are basically, they've been sanded. What you're doing is you were trying to get off any oils that got on there in the manufacturing process, or from being handled, or from people touching them in the store before you get them. So That's what needs to be done with this, and you can see I did not get this wet. It's damp in places, but I did not get it soppy wet because I absolutely do not want to raise that grain if I can keep from it. So now it's ready to have its first coat of cashmere put on it. Cashmere is tricky, but once you've learned all her quirks, she's a beautiful, beautiful color and gives just a fabulous finish. One of the things we have just done before I start painting is we have turned off the mini split and we have turned off the fan, because like any of the colors, you do not want a fan blowing directly on it while you're painting because it will dry too fast on you and mess up the finish. And cashmere is absolutely the most finicky about that. So there's a sweet spot with applying cashmere. You should see some bubbles when you're rolling, but if you have too many bubbles or they're too big, you're either pressing too hard with the roller or you have too much paint. But if you're not getting bubbles at all, you don't have enough paint on there. And the side that is raw wood, that's been sanded down to raw wood, you'll see smaller bubbles and less, because the dry wood will help displace the paint and pull it in. The finished side will not do that. And having a small brush like this, and I prefer one that's angled, is really nice. If you get paint pooled in a corner or here, you can smooth it easily and catch those drips or runs if they occur. I like to start with this decorative edge here and then the center, and you'll see why when I use the roller on this.
Notice how much paint she picks up on the brush and how often she dips the brush. I prefer the perfect amount of paint, thank you.
And sometimes not applying enough paint to these decorative edges because you're afraid you're going to get runs actually winds up causing you to have to paint more coats because the paint was too thin on those edges, on those decorative runs. I'm dipping a lot into the paint. I'm not going high on my brush because that just wastes paint, because you never ever use paint that you get way up in the brush. And it's also a nightmare to clean. So while it's still like this, before I do anything else, I'm going to roll that. And then I'm also going to roll up here where I got some paint onto it to smooth that out, or you wind up with a ridge of paint that you can see when you have put the remainder of your paint on there. If you pull away from those edges with the brush, you don't push paint into those areas. To cause pools. First rolls across, and I put too much paint. So I'm going to have to roll more, but I'd rather have a little too much with cashmere than not enough.
I prefer HTP tools be used as I deserve the very best. And please use the roller gently. Blend those brush marks, but then ever so lightly pop the bubbles.
If you get a place that tries to pull like that just did, go the opposite direction, rolling on it to stop that. I'm using the very edge to get into this, and I will definitely wash this roller out before I go to do any more coats with it. But the bubbles that are up really close to the edge, the corner of that roller is your friend to get those out.
Take special care to make sure all those pesky little bubbles are popped, so the surface dries smooth. Nothing can be allowed to mar the perfection of my beautiful complexion, as I'm certainly beyond those blotchy teen years.
Cashmere is also a little more inclined to create bubbles. I'm not pressing down, I'm letting this just roll itself across this.
Gently, gently. That's the way. I am, after all, a royal personage.
The last thing you want to do is roll underneath the edges to catch any overage or run of paint that may have gotten onto the other side of your door. Normally, I would paint the back of the doors first and then the front, but in this case I'm just looking to show you if there's any difference of importance between sanding and not sanding, and the application and finish of cashmere over honey oak. This is the side that still has finish on it that was painted. This side is the raw wood. It covered a little bit better on the raw wood, which is to be expected because raw wood will pull in some paint. But contrary to what a lot of people say, it does not pull in tons of paint. The one thing about raw wood, when you've sanded down to raw wood and you're painting with any of the colors, you have to do a light sanding after just that first coat, because there's a tiny bit of the grain that has been raised and you'll feel a little bit of roughness with your fingertips. The easiest way to do it and the fastest is 220 grit, not a sponge, just the sandpaper.
Just look at that first coat, and peasants claim it's an ugly coat. I think not.
Feeling both of them. This I can feel a little bit of bumpiness too. There's not as much on this one. You can still feel roughness there. And right there. Okay. Now, you cannot leave this sanding dust on here. If you do, this layer of paint is going to have a ton of texture in it, because all that sanding grit is going to pile up in your paint. But this is the only level on raw wood that you now need to wipe it off. And a damp paper towel is the best way to grab it. Vacuuming will not get it all off. It just doesn't. And this doesn't damage what you've already done. I'm wiping the other side just in case I threw some over there, even though I did not sand this side. So this is going to get its next coat of paint. With the extra dry time that cashmere needs, and this and the other examples that you're going to see in this video have dried overnight. I left them completely to do that. And if you watch the finish, you'll see it change over that period of time. I discovered the tips that I'm showing you, I discovered doing the cashmere cabinets for my kitchen. Thankfully, I started on the back side, which is a really good plan for anybody. Start on the back side of your cabinets because that's going to get you through the learning curve. I discovered that it needs that extra time to level out fully so that you do not get texture in the additional layers. The amount of pigment in it is one of the reasons. There's a whole big long chemistry lesson behind that I'm not going to go into, but there is reason for why this color and some of the lighter other whites need more dry time for their pigment to level out properly. You don't want to wrap these overnight and use them. One, your brush is going to get stiff. It's not going to glide easy. It's not going to let you wiggle easily into the spaces, and it's also in all likelihood going to get dry spots on it that as you wiggle it going back and forth, you're going to get little chips of drying paint or dried paint into what your surface is, and it's a disaster. You're really, if you're not dipping way down into the paint, you're not wasting any paint by washing your brushes, and you're starting with a nice clean brush. You're starting with a clean roller. The rollers especially, and if you're doing cabinets with cashmere, you need to change your roller at least every 3 to 4 doors that you're doing. Drop it in a bowl of water. These things come in 2 packs. Pick up the second one and keep painting. When the second one's ready to wash, wrap your brush in a double layer of saran, set it aside, wash these out really well, and then squeeze them between piles of layers of paper towel. Squeeze most of the moisture out to start with, and then squeeze them into paper towels until all you feel is a light dampness on them, and they're ready to go again. So you don't have to stop and wash everything out every time, but you do need to have those rollers staying clean. It works better for all colors, but cashmere, it's an absolute must. And I found the same with bone, because bone doesn't have a whole lot more pigment in it compared to this. So those are tips I hope will help you. So we're going to go at this the same way as yesterday. You can see I'm not going very far in with the brush.
What princess would wear yesterday's clothes? Certainly not me. Wash those tools.
You're going to have gaps, and that is okay, because that is a crack that is between the panel and the frame that allows for expansion. You really don't want to caulk those, because it's going to, after a while, create a larger crack than the first one you started with.
Notice how quickly she is working. Such care and respect for my personal space, so my finish will be perfection.
The paint can dry so fast that I do not like to do the entire frame. I do just two sides. If it's a really large door, I will do each side of the frame, rolling it for each section. I did that with my kitchen cabinets because they're 42-inch doors, and it kept me from getting texture in them. You need good light so that you can see if there's still any bubbles that need to lightly be gone over, and if there's any places where you have missed getting the brush strokes blended. Normally I move a cabinet door a lot more. I would move it around different ways, but I'm trying to keep a good view for you to see what's happening with these. The light that I stepped into let me see bubbles that I had not seen. And they were large enough that had I left them, they would have created bubble spots that would have looked like texture on the front of the door. Hopefully you can see that 2 coats of cashmere are not looking splotchy. It's looking good. This needs to dry again. I'm going to let this dry at least 6 hours, if not 8.
Please remember that I need my beauty sleep between coats, and your patience will be rewarded.
This one is now also ready to paint. You may be able to see a little bit of shine here and here. It's because something, I don't know what, because oak does not bleed tannin. Something was bleeding through in a few spots in 2 places on this. I'm thinking some type of oil probably got on this because it was from Habitat for Humanity and they were really dirty when I got them. So what I did was I put a really quick coat of shellac just over those spots just to seal whatever that is so that it stops bleeding through. But I did not need to do that to the whole door.
It really takes just the teensiest bit more effort and following a few small mandates to keep a princess happy and allow her beauty to shine forth on her subjects.
This one's ready to dry. This is dried overnight, and 3 coats of cashmere has given full coverage and a beautiful finish. When people say they are needing to use 5, 6 coats of paint, no offense to anyone, but that is operator error. You should never need that many coats. As you're first learning cashmere, you may need 4 coats because you didn't apply enough on. And if you apply thick and thin areas trying to stretch the paint, that will cause you to have too many layers of paint because the layers where the paint is thin are constantly trying to catch up with the layers where the paint is much thicker and has much more coverage. So if you apply the paint the way you have seen me applying it in this video, you should always get 3 coats cashmere full coverage, unless you have areas where there's some really deep, narrow places that you have to work that you're avoiding getting pools of paint in there or putting too much paint and obliterating the detailing, which I will show you on the laminate door. There is an area of that, but it's not the entire door. So you can see there's full coverage on this, and what we're going to do with this door is also zoom in for you. We're going to change the lighting so you can actually see the surface well, because white reflects so well that it's hard to see the finish. But so that you can see the difference between the side that was sanded and the side that wasn't. So you can make your own decision for whether or not that much work is worth it to you. And if you're going to apply a wood filler over this, there's some products out there on the market right now. It still requires sanding before you apply that product. So again, there's multiple steps to get to the point that you might have absolutely no grain showing on your doors. The minimal amount of grain that shows on oak doors to me is not worth the effort. That's a personal preference, and you would need to research those products yourself. While it's not what you would expect, where my finger is right now, that is the surface that was sanded down to raw wood. Felt much smoother than the original finish, but you can see the grain more in that than in this side where the finish was left intact. The fill with the poly into the grain actually helped the paint to cover the grain more. So this is over the original finish, and this is sanded. In my opinion, it's definitely not worth the time invested to sand on these, unless you've got some water damage on it. And if you've got water damage or chips, that's a whole nother thing. That does need sanded, that does need filled. Any fill that you do needs a coat of shellac on it before you start painting. So that's this door done. This is a laminate surface. In my opinion, it's the biggest stinker of all surfaces to try to paint because it's very slick, it's plasticky. Plastic itself isn't difficult, like Rubbermaid containers and stuff, outdoor storage containers, those are easy to coat the paint on. But the slickness of laminate cabinets can be a real pain. One of the things I added to this to let you see how cashmere can cover is I added Envy, Stormy, Amalfi, and Monarchy in spots, a coat of that on here, just to make this a tougher color-wise surface to paint. And again, I'm going to do the center of this first. Kind of pouncing your brush into the corners helps to get paint down in there. And Jim, if you can hand me from over there, there's a piece of like a third of the True applicator over by the window on the tabletop. Sometimes when you're in a spot that's this tight, sometimes the roller works by itself, and sometimes you need a piece of the True applicator to make it easier to get into those tight spaces and actually get the stippling done. Cashmere always needs extra time to dry between coats, but any color over laminate needs to dry at least 8 hours or overnight just for the first coat to let it get a good grip on the slick surface. I'm going to see if this will get into, nope, it's not going to. So as tight as that is, I'm going to pounce in there with the True applicator. Get that pool that was right there. If I were not trying to do this on camera, I would be spinning this door all over the place and just walking around it, so I don't miss places like that.
She thought those color spots would be a challenge for me. Just see how easily I cover them using the HTP tools as I glide across that pesky slick surface.
You want a good coat on laminate, but the first coat you cannot put it as heavy as you normally do and normally can with the paint. Having a bobble like that is normally scary, but because this is laminate, this is not drying super fast, so you can go back and touch that up with the roller.
Take special care to make sure all those pesky little bubbles are popped, so the surface dries smooth. Nothing can be allowed to mar the perfection of my beautiful complexion, as I am certainly beyond those blotchy teen years. Gently, gently, that's the way.
Last thing, always go to the bottom edge. Roll that to catch any runs or drips or overage. I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but the areas where I had put HTP paint colors, I'm getting a little more adhesion because the cashmere is going over the HTP instead of just this. Now, this also needs to dry, not just because it's cashmere, but because it's laminate. It needs to dry at least 8 hours, 12 or more is better. So this is going to be left until tomorrow, and I will put another coat on it then.
A princess needs a beauty sleep.
You want to always start with a clean brush and a clean roller with your next coat of cashmere. You're going to see paint on my roller and brush because I just did the next coat on the small cabinet door, so these have not been sitting. They haven't been drying or been wrapped overnight, which is something you really do not want to do with cashmere, and I don't recommend it with any of the colors as long as you're not. You should never be putting paint way up in your brush anyway. Very little paint comes out of the brush in reality, so it's better to clean it and have a good working tool.
Yes, please, clean tools. A princess cannot have flakes of paint from dirty tools marring her complexion.
I'm using the little brush to get into this spot. And then I'm going to use a piece of the True applicator to blend that area. Laminate with any color needs an overnight or at least an 8-hour dry between coats to keep it from trying to lift before it cures. Once it's cured, it's not going to lift off your cabinets. The first coat needs extra time. After the first coat with colors other than cashmere, you can go ahead and paint normally, just like you normally would. The 45 minutes to an hour after the coat has gone on, you should be able to put another coat on. But not Miss Cashmere.
I ask that you pay close attention to both, how quickly and carefully she is working with me, and how much paint she applies, and how often she dips the brush to get paint.
And catch any of those areas where it went up over, so you do not get lap ridges. and pouncing to get any of the bubbles from where I went off the edge of that, and the roller will do it just as well as the true applicator. You could see all the bubbles. Now just very lightly rolling the roller. They are gone. Going across your brush strokes first is the fastest way to blend them out. And work on them long enough that you do not see them anymore. Last roll under the edge of the door to catch overages. While it's still wet, double check that you have not left bubbles anywhere.
May I remind you that this is coat number 2. There's nothing ugly here.
Cashmere tends to create more bubbles, but there's a happy medium between too many bubbles, too big of bubbles, and no bubbles. If there's no bubbles, you have not put enough cashmere on. Seriously, the hardest thing to do, but you need to do it, is walk away. Let it dry. Don't keep working on it. As long as you don't have very easy to see bubbles. I'm not talking about this surface the way it looks wet right now. I'm talking about actual bubbles. As long as you don't see any of those, walk away from it and let it dry, because it will settle those out. I got busy doing other things, and both of these doors have now dried about 9 hours, which is no big deal because I wanted them to dry somewhere between 6 and 8, preferably 8, so 9's good. So this is the third coat going on.
I wish to remind you that I do not require, or like primer. Just look at me. Would a princess allow primer to touch her beautiful face? I should think not.
You can see I am not taking a long time putting the paint on a door. It shouldn't take you more than 4 to 5 minutes max, and that's a long time to get the paint on. If you're taking longer than that, your paint is going to start drying on you, and as you roll, you're going to start creating texture. If you get this on, you get it rolled, you leave it alone, it levels out. The cabinets in here, I took 2 days doing them, including the large cabinet here and all the small cabinets that are pull-outs that were made of all different kinds. All of the red cabinets in here was a 2-day process. And that was 3 coats of paint, because red, like white, strangely enough, takes more coats of paint to fully cover. Red does. This is 3 coats on the laminate. I expected, because of these grooves here that are narrow and tight, in avoiding getting runs of paint in there, pools of paint, I did not apply the paint as heavily. There is a small area here and here that did not give me the perfect coverage that I want. So in this case, what you could do is simply apply a little bit of paint here, here, and in these grooves. Let it dry and be done. But in my experience with cashmere, other colors haven't done it to me, but cashmere doesn't like partial coats. That's where some of her princess personality comes out of, don't give me part, I want all. I want everything. So I am going to add a 4th coat to all of this. Looking at this morning too, there's an area right here in this groove where some of the bubbles, I did not see them, and when they dried, they've left a bubbly texture there. At any point with any of the paints, when you have a coat of paint, if you see texture, you have to stop and sand that. You can't leave it, because every layer of paint is going to make it more visible. Cashmere is especially prone to that. If you have any texture left in it, you're going to see that amplified in the following coats of paint. So before I put this coat on here, I'm going to sand that out. And those, that's bubbles. It's not orange peel. There's no orange peel anywhere on this, and there was none on the other door. So these bubbles do have to come out if I want the smooth finish, which I do. So it doesn't take much. In areas like that, it's easy to have that happen. That's not a ton of work. This is damp. I want to make sure I don't leave any of that sanding residue in there, because that will definitely create texture. And I do have the small brush handy in case I get a pool that I need to smooth out. But you should be able to see on camera, this is a good finish. It's not blotchy, there's not tons of highs and lows in it. It's just the design of this door is causing more work to be done. Another mistake people can make with any of the colors is thinking, oh, I don't have to apply as much paint after the first coat. I just need the first coat heavy. You apply the paint with exactly the same amount every coat. I'm not using this door except for demonstration, so I am not on this coat of paint going to go all along the edges. I'll roll them, but I'm not going to add more paint to them. I saw bubbles down in there, is why I went down in there with my roller.
Rolling is ever so important. Just firmly enough to blend the brush strokes and then ever so gently to remove those ghastly bubbles so my beauty shines with the lustrous glow of perfection.
Double check for bubbles, double check for pools. And it's done. These are the raw wood shelves that are going into the pantry. They've been sanded, they have been wiped down with a damp cloth just to get all the sanding dust off. Don't waste your wipes on that. Then they were wiped down with the deglosser wipes so it does not raise the grain on this. If you put it on with a brush and the grain scrubby, you're going to horrifically raise the grain in any raw wood. And then you're going to have a ton of sanding to do to take care of that before you can paint. So what I wanted you to see with this is what needs to be fixed on this, because these are pine. These are composite pieces with some of the shelving. This is pieces of just cut lumber that have been put together, but not in the small chunks that this is. I wanted you to see the difference in you don't have to prime this whole thing. This side needs nothing done to it. This side of it has one spot that's truly a knot that's going to need to be filled and sanded. You want to do that fill after you have deglossed, or expect that you're going to have to seal it with shellac before you can degloss. This piece has a lot on it that needs fixed. This is actually a vein in the wood that can bleed. These are knots that need to be covered. These dark areas are. This light area is not, that's grain. This light area around this actual knot doesn't need anything done to it. This doesn't, but all these little knots and places need to be filled. Those are the places it's going to bleed tannin. So on these, I'm going to show you quickly on a couple of these what you do, and then off camera, I'm going to do the rest of it. New bottle. It doesn't take tons. And I prefer a metal spatula, but you can certainly use a plastic cutting knife. And you can see just putting in the wood putty is doing a lot to camouflage that. Once this dries, I will sand it, and I will seal this with shellac over the wood putty, simply because the places that make use of the putty that stays on your putty knife, or the wood fill rather, the damp plastic wood, because it will have a different sheen. All those spots that I just filled will have a different sheen if I don't shellac them to seal them before I start painting, because it will absorb into it. And that can cause you to have to do a lot more paint layers than you really need to, because this should take 2 coats and I should be done with it. This is damp plastic wood. It comes in all different colors. You can get it from white to really dark. So depending on whether or not you're trying to stain something, you would, if you're painting, it really doesn't matter a lot, except I always like the natural, which is what this is, because it acts like a primer coat for me. As far as the coloration, I'm not having to worry about these not covering, because they're so different in color from the wood. It dries pretty fast, so if it starts drying over what you're trying to fill, clean it off with paper towel. You don't have to have it completely smooth, but it certainly saves you a lot of sanding. pretty even. I have already sanded and wiped down with paper towel, just a dry paper towel to dust off the sanding residue. I prefer the hard block that you can make yourself with carpenter's tape to attach sandpaper to. This happens to be a block of plastic trim we had. It could be wood. It has more strength to it than the sanding sponges, and it goes a lot faster. And you can make it to the size you need. That would have taken me a lot longer with a sanding sponge because it just doesn't have the pressure. But this is ready now for me to put some shellac on, which I'm going to show you. And then once that has dried, I will wipe these down completely with a damp paper towel, and they'll be ready to start painting. But you don't have to shellac the entire thing. You just need to shellac where you have put the wood putty. And shellac, just like anything else, needs to be stirred. When you first open it up, it's going to look like a very pretty clear golden, but you need it to be stirred, and then it has a slightly cloudy appearance to it. You do want enough shellac that you can see that it has become wet with it, but you don't want thick coats. One, you don't need it, and two, it'll leave some slight brush strokes. Don't let the fact that you can see the knots again scare you into the fact that they haven't been sealed, because they have. They're filled, and this is what is actually sealing them. But they're perfectly level, and the shellac is coating it in so that the tannins won't bleed.
A princess naturally expects that surfaces have been properly prepared for her entrance. You have our thanks.
And that's what's going to be done to all the rest of these, and then they're going to be ready to start painting. A lot of work has been done on these off camera as I was continuing to work, and you didn't need to see the whole process, but I wanted you to see how this looks at different stages. So this obviously has no finish on it. This has one coat of cashmere on it. And since it's the first coat, it's a little bit rough. And I'm going to show you what has to be done with that. Because it's
Notice
over raw
the
wood.
coverage achieved
Otherwise it
with
wouldn't
just
be.
one coat.
This is 2 coats of cashmere. This actually, if it was a cabinet front, would need to have a 3rd coat because there's some lighter spaces that some of the grain showed a little darker through it. This had a lot of knots on it that you saw when I was working on it before. Since this is going to be the very tip-top shelf, this side will never be seen. Even if I climbed up into the pantry, it would be hard to see this. So this has plenty on it to protect it, so I'm not putting 3 coats on this. The underneath side, though, that I still need to paint, is going to get 3 coats because I will be looking up into the pantry and I will see the bottom of this all the time. But you can see how well just 2 coats of cashmere covered. And I'm going to show you how I do that, how I'm applying it to get that kind of coverage. But first, on this board, that it's the first coat, This is slightly rough because it slightly raised the grain. If I had used heavy deglosser on this, it would have been very heavy grain raised because the water would have popped it up. But the paint does not lift it like that, but it does lift a little bit. So especially if you're going to be using this on cabinet doors or a piece of furniture, you really want it smooth, and I like my cabinet shelves to be really smooth. So all it takes And then, because I always have it handy and I don't always have water bottles handy, I don't know why, but I don't. I just use Windex or a little bit on the paper towel to make sure I have grabbed all that sanding dust, which isn't much, but now it's perfectly smooth and it's not going to have that roughness that will create texture in your paint. So now this is ready for its second coat of paint. With any color of the paint, but especially with cashmere, you apply a liberal coat. On a board this size or on the front of a cabinet, I'm going to divide it into thirds. And don't waste your time trying to get the paint on perfectly. And you can see how often I'm dipping, and it's just the tip of my brush. That also doesn't get paint all the way up into the top of this and waste your paint when you're trying to clean it out, because you're never going to use paint that you get all the way up in here. First rolls across. Yes, there's a crazy amount of bubbles sometimes. On the raw wood layer, there is not, and you'll see a difference in a minute.
That teensy little step is so important to creating my perfect finish.
This is barely touching. I'm letting it roll itself. I'm not pressing down on it. And then get moving on the second. If I turn my brush, that keeps me from running a drip across this. And I'm barely getting up into where I have already painted before, because I don't want to keep re-rolling over that. I can see where my edge is, so I am not rolling all over back into that. I'm just rolling where I had brush into it. Same thing when I come here. You don't want to spend forever applying the paint or rolling the paint. That's what creates really bad texture in any of the colors or dull spots in the finish. You feel that was a little bit thinner. My brush was starting to drag, so I added more. This is my front edge. I don't want to get it on that other board, which I normally do not paint on top of them. This front edge has already had 2 coats from where I did the bottom. So this is its final edge coat. Well, a little more paint on the garage floor. Nothing on it. Here we go. And I'm rolling under that edge because there's bound to have been a little bit of overage on it. Now you can see 2 coats. You should not see thick and thin coats. If you're applying the paint heavy enough, and you can see I didn't wind up with a ton of big bubbles left, it's a good finish here. So this needs to move on. And I will start this one. Same process. You really have to work quickly when it's raw wood because it really wants to dry fast because it's drying from the top and the bottom because the wood is dry and absorbent. But contrary to what some people will say, it does not soak in tons of paint. If you see, I haven't done my brush any more often on this than I did on that second coat. But you do see there are fewer bubbles. And if I had waited and slowed down putting this on, I would get bad roller marks in it because I'm dealing with raw wood. Why this is easier than getting out spray equipment. Don't want that thin. When you feel your brush start to grab, you need more paint. I'm going sideways at the ends because I don't want to dump a bunch of paint overage off the ends. Both sides of raw wood have to be stained or painted or they warp really badly over time. I will get the last coat on this front edge when I do the next coat on this. And on anything, this is what your first coat of cashmere should look like. You shouldn't have thicks and thins where you can see roller marks and you can see areas that aren't done. Jim, can you hold this for just a second so I can trade these things? Move this one out of the way. And then you can see on this one why I don't put primer on even over these knots that have been covered in shellac. The primer in the paint is more than sufficient. And since they're sealed, they are not going to bleed through. Yes, I could have painted this whole board, but with it raw wood, not a good plan. It will be drying into the wood, and then you're going to have thicks and thins that you're going to fight with. The next coat, so that I don't have lap marks or dry marks, I'll still do the same thing. I'll split it. It's just as easy as painting the whole board.
As you can see, I have no need of ghastly rough primer being applied before me. I cover brilliantly with my own primer and top coat.
And you can see the knots are covered beautifully. Finish painting these out for the amount of paint that they need. These are all now on the top side, so the top side of the shelves will all get 3 coats. After putting the 3rd coat of cashmere on this shelf and looking at 2 coats of cashmere on the shelf, I made the executive decision that these are perfectly durable with 2 coats. They're going to be pantry shelves. I just wanted them to match the rest of my kitchen, which has cashmere uppers. So the rest of the shelves are not getting 3 coats, but they are going to get a band of copper along the very front edge that I will antique with black antiquing gel so that it matches the pools that are in my kitchen, which are antique copper. So that's where we are with this, but I wanted you to see that this is 2 coats, this is 3 coats, and it wasn't, the 2 and 3 coats are not soaking into the wood, only the first coat would have gone in a little bit with raw wood. So even on the 2 coats, there are places where a half coat, where that you would just do the area that looked thin, would work, but I have never had luck doing that with cashmere. All the other colors I've been able to do that, but not cashmere. Cashmere I've always needed a full coat to keep it from looking like it was different levels of paint. So next up, copper, and then start reassembling this pantry. This is cashmere on the left, Mediterranean Capri mix in the middle, and a factory spray finish on a cabinet. These were all taken in the same lighting, the same distance from the surface, and they are all magnified 3 times. The dark mark that you see on the Mediterranean and Capri is a shadow that I could not get off while I was trying to get where you could actually see what the finish looked like. You can see there is very little difference between the cashmere and Mediterranean finishes that were done with brush and roll and the factory spray finish. The factory spray finish is a little shinier because it was a higher gloss paint that was put onto the cabinets that we were photographing. There isn't a match that I could find for the luster of HTP's finish. So again, it's up to you what you want to do for finishing your cabinets. Also bear in mind, if you choose to spray, you are going to use more paint. Depending on the sprayer model that you use, it can be a significantly larger amount of paint. So the final decision is yours, but we have tried to give as fair a comparison between these methods as is possible. Thank you, and I hope this helps you. This door has dried. It's got a beautiful finish. It's got full coverage. There is no orange peel on either one of these pieces. In the film How to Deal with Raw Wood That Has Knots, and you saw what to do with raw wood with this. If you have a door that's a simple design like this, you should absolutely never need more than 3 coats of cashmere. When you're dealing with a door that has really tight details on it, that door you may need with cashmere 4 coats. If you're dealing with another color, you should be able to just spot paint that area and be done with it. And most colors are only going to take you 2 coats. Yellow and red are anomalies that usually take 3. And sometimes bone takes 3 coats. The other whites, 2 coats have been my experience with them. So it's how you're putting it on. It's paying attention to what the surface looks like before you start, what the surface looks like as you're painting. If at any point in any of the colors you see in a coat of paint that has dried, you see texture, get out your sandpaper and sand it smooth. I'm not talking a little bitty light, oh, I sanded it a little bit, it's not going to show anymore. Tip it up to the light. If you still see that texture, you have not sanded enough and that texture is going to build. I really hope this has helped you. The techniques used with this work with any color of HTP paint to get a smooth, flawless finish. Keep going and rewards us for the work that we're putting into these for you.